already explained to you at an earlier time? Billy says yes, I remember, and I was also worried about that because I had no longer thought about it and had left her on last Saturday so furiously. Semyaza says I already imagined that. It could truly only be that you had no longer thought about it. This was as certain to me as also the fact that you would remember this again and then act accordingly. There wasn't another possibility for me. It was, however, only your rage that had let you forget everything. Billy says you speak to me from the heart, my child, so it was, in fact, which is why I then also had rather unpleasant hours on Sunday. But Quetzal, you once told me some time ago that you would attend to the concerns regarding the center, so namely in reference to the bequest. At that time, you gave me advice, which I didn't want to accept for reasons known to you. Interestingly enough, however, now also Elsie has approached me with the same result that you have worked out. About that, first of all the question, have you influenced her somehow? Quetzal says no, I haven't done that, but if Elsie has arrived at the same result, then that testifies to the fact that she assesses things correctly and has fathomed certain things in a logical form. Furthermore, I've talked about that with Patah and Semyaza and we have come to the following result, which should not be officially made known, however, which is why I must ask you to deliver the necessary advice to Elsie in a separate form. I'll give you this advice at the end of all our remarks, so you can receive it separately at the end of the later report transmission and write it down. Unfortunately, we must take these concerns to hand and regulate them in this manner because the scheming among individual group members is so pronounced that they would create interferences and renewed intrigues. Thus, solely Elsie should be knowledgeable about these things, over which she must, however, maintain silence toward every group member under all circumstances. Unfortunately, this isn't otherwise possible under the given circumstances. Billy says I know, but still, I fear that sometime later, the common suspicion will arise that I would have had my hands in play. I have had very damn bad experiences with such matters, my son. Patah says that would probably be the last infamy that one could foist on you. Elsie knows that everything isn't like that, which is why she should also attest in writing that you have nothing to do with that and that you also don't accept our and her solution. Billy says I have already told her that it doesn't suit me. Patah says then she is oriented about that and can also correctly hold everything affirmatively in writing. Billy says but still, it doesn't suit me. Patah says we must act in accordance with the purpose and the given circumstances and in accordance with the sense of duty to be expected. Billy says that is absolutely clear to me, but surely, there still would have been another solution. Patah says unfortunately no, at least not for the time being. It will only change when the center is group property. Billy says then just do what you want. I am simply not in demand in this. Semyaza says you're wrong. We understand your objections very well and also know that they are very justified, unfortunately. However, the circumstances and all the conditions are, at present, truly given in such a way that we can only take this one possibility into consideration and declare it as a final solution. In this regard, we have really analyzed and worked through everything conceivably possible for us and have found that this solution offers the only complete security. Billy says then it should just be like that. I probably can't do anything against it, even if I don't consider it to be right. Patah says any attempt against it would also be wrong and very unserviceable to the overall task, my friend. Billy says then for my part, it shall be like that. But may I ask another question? Semyaza says sure, just ask. Billy says well, it's like this, I would gladly like to know. Can one of you tell me whether Elsie was something in my last life, damn? I mean, whether we knew each other. Semyaza says no, that wasn't so, for at that time, she wasn't incorporated into an incarnation. Billy says and in my life before. Semyaza says there, she was a friend. But at that time, both of you were otherwise married up to the ends of your lives. I wouldn't like to mention more about that for the time being. Billy says then please still tell me, however, whether Elsie has had one or two other incarnations since then. Semyaza says since then it hasn't been only one, that is, not just the current one. Billy says that's sufficient for me, thanks. By the way, what I still wanted to say, out of the approximately 300 previously neglected pages of the last 2 years, I have reworked well over half in the meantime. If possible, I will still also create the remaining missing pages in the foreseeable future. Quetzal says I know, you have finally laid out the law of love and the clarification of life and death. Semyaza says you have done this work in a very short time and admirably well, as Quetzal explained to me. I estimated that you would need several months for that, as the subject matter of both works was extremely difficult. Billy says it has given me trouble all right, and indeed, a great deal, which I must admit. Patar says but still, you have completed it very quickly. I would like to ask that you make a copy of each work available to me. My daughter Player would also like a copy of each. Billy says you can have that, indeed, Quetzal also wants one of each. Semyaza says you also shouldn't forget me. Billy says but I will always give you a copy of everything anyway. Semyaza says sure, but these will always be assigned to our archive. But I would still like to have a copy of each of these works for myself alone. Billy says okay, I will gladly do that. But tell me, Patar, how will you read my books, then? You only speak Greek, and we always have to use this translator together. How will you find your way in the books, then? Patar says I'll let them be translated for me into my native language. In all other respects, I have decided that next year I will endeavor myself around the German language, if it should be decided in the month of March that we can continue to attend to our task and still fulfill this. Billy says man, I think that's great, but look here, I received these photos a few months ago from abroad, with the note that the pictures were made in a private museum of a man who had stolen some scrolls in an ancient grave somewhere in Egypt. I have also received the film of these pictures. What do you think of it, Patar? Patar says he looks closely at the photos and then puts them in a device, which looks like a screen, and then speaks some words that are unintelligible to me into the same device. In a few minutes, we will have an analysis that tells us whether the image prints are genuine and whether the photographed material is old or new and, thus, whether it concerns a forgery or not. The writing on the prints really should be known to you, my friend. Billy says it is, indeed, known to me, as Svarth and Askit have striven to teach me this language. This concerns the Old Liran language, which is extremely similar to our German language in very many values, so, for example, in the sentence structure and in many other things, like, for example, in sentence progression. Patar says you still understand the language. Do you also still understand how to speak it? Billy says with the speaking it lacks quite enormously, but with the deciphering, it goes to some extent, although I had quite nasty difficulties with it at the beginning. Patar says then you should practice the language again, for it is still current in certain planetary areas. Maybe you can use it sometime. Billy says you good. I already messed around with it for several months until I only had the alphabet together again and was able to decipher the writing, which has, indeed, no longer been current for around 8,000 years and has probably also been completely forgotten by the human beings of Earth. Patar says that is of correctness, but it amazes me that you have managed to decipher it. After all, for approximately 15 years, you evidently no longer dealt with it. Billy says that may be right. Patar says and the deciphering, is it of correctness? Billy says I hope, here, you can see. Patar says he studies my arts of deciphering. If I didn't see it for myself with my own eyes, I would have to doubt it. You have deciphered everything flawlessly and have also translated it flawlessly into the German language, as my daughter just whispered to me. Billy says then I am, indeed, calmed. To me, it would be. Patar says one moment, my friend, we're getting the analysis. Yes, look here, the prints are genuine and show a photographed material that is 8,30 years old. It concerns a paper-like material that has all the properties of paper but is far more stable and was used by the old descendants of the Lyrans who ultimately came to Earth. This means that the man with whom you've spoken must, therefore, actually be in possession of 8,30-year-old original documents. Where should this man live and what is his name? Billy says I don't know that, unfortunately, because that wasn't said to me. Patar says that is a great pity, so we can probably hardly find him, although it would be very valuable to have some of these original documents because we ourselves also don't possess such kinds of documents. Especially the contents of this document photographed here are very valuable. We also weren't aware that such exists. May I keep one of these prints? Billy says but of course, you can even have 2 or 3 if you want. Patar says that isn't necessary, 1 is quite enough. Billy says then take 1. Patar says I thank you very much. Translators note the photo just mentioned, as found in this section of Contact 117 on page 310 of the German version of the Pleiadian/Pleiaren Contact Reports, Block 3, appears below. This is the same photo which appears on page 15 of Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4, which is shown below. Michael Hesmann's English translation of Meier's German translation of the writing shown above, which appears on page 18 of Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4, is as follows. There was a prophet which was the prophet Enoch, which was Elias, who was an important prophet of the Spirit of the Lord, whose name was Moses, who was a leader of the Artumans as Eliah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad and Billy. This spirit will reincarnate as a prophet who will be born as a teacher of cosmic law, and he will enter the human race as one Billy, who is one Edward Meier, who will be a teacher of the Spirit. He walks in the light of Spirit. Now, the story relating to how this document came into Meier's possession, as given by Wendell Stevens in the preface of Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4, is very different from the story found in Contact 117. Wendell tells it as follows. This is a scrap of burned paper that Billy Meier let me examine when I discovered it in his simple wooden desk drawer along with slides and photocopies. The story he told me was that Askit, the cosmonaut from the Dal universe system, took him one day to an Egyptian tomb in a pyramid that had been blown open with dynamite by an English archaeologist in the past. She wanted to show him something of interest at that site. Using the cloaking devices to render them invisible to others, they went past the guard and into the tomb. There, Askit stirred some burned fragments of paper in a corner of the tomb and fished out a particular scorched scrap, seared to a soft brown color and burned around the edges as though it were in the center of a number of pages, having all the outside pages and edges burned away in a brief fire. She handed it to him, saying that he might find it of interest to him. He said, "Why so? I can't even read it." At that, she took the scrap and asked him for a piece of paper and pencil, which he produced from his pocket. Askit then copied several of the strange characters from the burned scrap and marked the German equivalents under them on Meier's paper. Handing both pieces of paper back to Meier, she said that from that, he could interpret the rest and read the page for himself. Once translated, the new words on the page were still not clear because some of the translated words were not in German but involved words from other Romance languages based on Latin. We could not find any German speaker who could read the translated message to us until we showed our work to Michael Hesmann, a multilingual German UFO researcher who speaks and reads 5 languages fluently. He came up with the interpretation we have printed here. Please note that the last name in the line of 6 in the 6th line is composed of 5 characters. According to our interpretations, it translates as Billy, the German spelling for his American nickname. I did not get this translation from Billy Meier because he had not translated it by the time I photographed it for my files. We have been unable to properly identify the symbol form used in the original note. This seems to be too elaborate a mystery to be a hoax on the part of anybody because it never went anywhere and has not been released anyplace for 15 years, up to now. This is a long time to wait, indeed, if it was planned as bait for me. The following is a clarification on why Wendell's account differs from that of Contact Report 117, the document that appears in Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4 on page 15, and in the German version of the Pleiadian/Pleiaren Contact Reports on page 310 is also found in Meier's photo index, where it appears as photo #1059, along with an explanation. According to Christian Frenner of Figu, Switzerland, the English translation of the explanation reads as follows. A Mr. Jim Crowley from England secretly photographed an ancient document that is in possession of a noble private collector, and he sent Billy photos and negatives and asked him whether he, Billy, or the Pleiadians/Pleiarans could decipher the letters. According to his information, the noble Englishman purchased the partially burnt document, together with other specimens, in Egypt decades ago. Billy immediately recognized the old Lyrian script, which he still was able to master rather well, and therefore could translate the document into German with Patar's help. According to Patar, the original document is more than 8,30 years old. In addition to the above information, Christian Frenner further clarified the issue on Figu Forum by writing, "It is true that Billy had a parchment in his possession that he had shown to Wendell Stevens. This he did under the condition that Wendell would not tell anybody about it, which he, Wendell, did in the meantime, obviously." Christian also wrote, "It is important to note that this piece of paper or parchment, which BTW Quetzal has taken into his possession many years ago, is not identical with the parchment that we are discussing here in the Figu Forum, the one from Contact Report 117. So it seems that Wendell was, in fact, shown an actual parchment by Billy, who told him how he had come across it in Egypt during his travels with Askit. However, the parchment found in Egypt was not identical with the photographed document that Wendell then put on page 15 of Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4. Thus, Wendell evidently confused two stories with one another when creating Message from the Pleiades, Volume 4, many years after he had already collected all the data. Billy says you owe me no thanks. But if you could still answer another question for me. Patar says if it lies within the possibility of an answer. Billy says I hope. Quetzal told me a month ago that by the senseless behavior of some group members, 2 people have been driven away, who had already belonged to the group once several thousand years ago as other personalities and who should now likewise join the new group again and take on important tasks. May we know, perhaps, whom it concerns with these 2? Patar says no, according to the given circumstances, it wouldn't be advisable to mention the names. The impossible behavior or senseless behavior of some group members, as you call it, doesn't allow this. In accordance with their still predominant, unbalanced, and destructive mentality, they would have the audacity to intervene with the 2 people or otherwise take selfish steps to introduce them, nevertheless, into the core of the group. But this would, with certainty, have very bad consequences because the 2 feel so shocked by the impossible behavior and the derogatory and insulting ways of speaking of various group members that they would truly feel disgust in themselves and, from this, would take steps against the continued existence of the group. But this isn't surprising because the human beings of Earth who are ruled by emotions are very susceptible to changes in mentality of an emotional origin. But that such negative emotions were excited in these 2 people, the guilt for this clearly lies with various group members. Truly, there can be no talk here of a normal evolution.